Hi, Neville. You're very
Good
welcome.
morning, Deirdre.
You're very welcome to Cornucopia Climate Chats, which is the podcast we're doing for our Cornucopia customers. And today we're going to be talking about waste management because, Neville, you and I have worked together with the Cornucopia waste going back many years. How did all that start between you and I? How did we get
I
going? Do you
think
remember?
I think I was a young Gosling, Deirdre, pounding the pavements on Exchequer Street, and you were a very kind lady because I think you were one of our very first customers on Exchequer Street. And at the time, myself and my own business partner Mark had an idea to start a concept which was new to the Irish market. That's where the business started. Both Mark and I were, involved in IT and other bits and pieces together. And we said, we worked for somebody at that time, and we said, let's start a business together, the two of us. So we were kind of friends and work colleagues, and then progressed on to forming a company and starting Key Waste. And it started out with one of us driving the truck and the other one knocking on doors, doing the business development piece. And then we alternated week on, week off. So I'd take the phones for a week and then he'd drive the truck. And then alternatively, I would drive the truck and he'd take the phones.
Isn't it
Um,
wonderful? And where are you up to now? Can I jump forward to now to
yeah, sure.
waste is now
So
key?
the business has moved on from skip bags because skip bags was very much a seasonal business for us. You know, you've got maybe 8 months of the summer. Our summers, and we can talk about it after, are getting warmer. But at the time, 20 years ago, you probably had a 7 to 8 month window where the weather was good. And then come November, December, it got colder and people didn't necessarily want to fill skip bags. So we had to look to diversify and we moved into commercial waste services.
Yes.
Um, and that's where our relationship started. So the business has moved from skip bags into commercial waste services, providing, largely businesses, commercial waste collections throughout Dublin and the greater Dublin area. We would service a lot of apartment blocks as well. From the two of us, we've probably progressed to maybe 250 work colleagues and over 100 trucks on the road.
Well done. And Neville, over how many years is that? 20
It's
years?
20 years, Deirdre. Doesn't
20
feel like it.
years. Yeah, I have a good
Seems
sense.
like
Well,
seems
congratulations.
like yesterday, but still, Deirdre, thankfully, still fully Irish owned because in our industry, a lot of our competitors have been bought out by private equity. So there's been a fair bit of consolidation, and you'll see it yourself that there's fewer waste providers out there.
Yeah, what I wanted to about today was, waste and the environment and waste and climate change. So over the years, particularly in the restaurant, we were asked to segregate our waste. You obviously came on stream after the city councils, or the city councils no longer collected the waste and it was privatized. So you were one of the private companies that was set up at that time, or you moved into that area. So, in terms of your experience, Neville, about getting people, restaurants, and also householders to separate waste, how have you seen a change in that over those 20 years?
Yeah, it's changed a huge amount. When we entered Dublin City, you're right to say that it was largely dominated by Dublin City Council. And at the time, Dublin City Council didn't offer customers segregation. So you were provided a steel black bin, if you recall, and everything went into the steel black bin. So we saw an opportunity to approach customers and, offer them a little bit more. So, we offered a recycling service. So we said we'd provide you a green bin for your recycling, which was a huge benefit. And also our payment terms were more flexible. So at the time, the council, you bought a 6 month tag, whereas we said, look, we'll set up a direct debit and pay us monthly in arrears. I
Yeah.
suppose those two things with the flexibility around payment and then the more important piece, offering recycling segregation and 7 day collection service, it was a win-win for customers. So really that's how we gained some traction in the city.
Yeah, and I know that, oh, I can't remember the exact details, but I know over the years for Cornucopia, we were able to put very little into sort of landfill. It was mostly compostable and then a lot of organic material, which was, the food waste. And we were separating our food waste, we were separating our recyclables, But when I was away over the summer, and I asked where I was away, should I separate my waste? And they were saying, no, there's no point in doing that. It all goes into landfill anyway. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast is I feel that your average person might still feel that in Ireland. What's the point of going to all of this effort with my green bin, with my brown bin, and with my black bin, because it's all goes into the same place and it's all a bit of a hoax. So part of my reason for doing this podcast is to try and say, no, that's not true. But I wanted to ask it more or less from the horse's mouth. Over
Yeah.
your experience of the 20 years, how true is that it's not treated well on the other end?
No, things have changed a lot. So when we started out, example would be people weren't separating their glass, and the glass in most cases was going into your black bin. So, the first step forward was recycling, then glass. People were more aware that glass, via bottle banks as well, but glass needed to be separated because it was obviously a product that could be reused. And furthermore, then organic. Now, Cornucopia was forward thinking and probably ahead of your time, whereby
Yes.
you were aware of the benefits and the value in separating your food. But ultimately, food separation has only become more commonly practiced in the last 3 to 4 years. And that's largely down to, the government doing different things. So take landfill, for example, a landfill levy tax. So they've been putting an additional tax on landfill over the last number of years to reduce our usage of landfill and reliance on landfill. I think at home, people have been given a brown bin in the last 3 to 4 years, which has made them aware of separating food. And pay by weight is another introduction in the last number of years, whereby people have realized if I don't take that heavy content, which is the food waste, out of my black bin, I'm going to be penalized because
Yes.
my black bin is going to be heavier and I'm going to pay more. So, a number of things there. There's been a fair bit of education done via schools, the Green Schools program. So kids are being educated in school now about segregation, and it's all color coded. So, the traditional colors are black for general waste, green for recycling, and brown for organic. And given that, uniformity, people are aware, and it's good to start at the schools. So I think people are being educated more. There's a mywaste.ie website as well that's been set up by the government, which is very helpful, giving a lot of guidance on how to segregate better. And then with social media, really, Deirdre, waste companies in general are putting a lot of information out there via their social media platforms too, on how people should segregate, what goes into your brown bin, what goes into your green bin.
There's three streams then. There's compostable, which is your brown bin. There's recyclables, which is your green bin, and general waste, which is your black bin. So in each of those three things, let's start with the recyclable. What happens when it goes to the recycling center?
Okay, so recycling largely goes into a facility called a MRF, MRF, and that stands for Material Recovery Facility. Ultimately, the recycling gets tipped on the floor, it gets picked up and put into a hopper, and it goes along a belt. And then there's different processes whereby those items are separated. The end goal for the waste processor is single stream. So to have single products out of that recycling bin. So on that process line, there'd be magnets that would take away a lot of the metals. There'd be blowers to take away a lot of the lighter fractions and lighter material. And then there'd be a picking line also to take away some of those items that haven't been picked up along the process. They all get reused then. So if you take cardboard, the cardboard all gets separated. It then gets baled into mill-sized or 1 ton bales, and then they get put into a container and they get sent overseas for reuse.
Okay, so
And they're sold. They're
so
sold.
the point is that it is worthwhile in Ireland today to put your stuff into your recycling bin, your green bin, to separate it at the point. And another sticky question, should you wash it before you put it in? And can it spoil the whole bin if you put in one dirty yogurt container?
It needs to be clean.
Yes.
It needs to be clean. I don't see the point in washing something out if it's relatively clean, because then you're using water unnecessarily, which in some cases defeats the purpose. It needs to be clean. You're right to say that if someone isn't as aware in terms of how clean something should be, if there's items of food in it and they're large items of food, no, they should be emptied into the compost bin and then that container washed out and put into the green bin.
Okay. So it's certainly worthwhile. And we'll come back to the export. I'm interested in the part about exporting. So just
Sure.
moving now to glass. Tell me what
Mhm.
happens when you go with your glass to your glass
Yeah.
center.
Yeah, so look, we're very fortunate that there's a good network of bottle banks throughout the country. So in most cases, wherever any of us live, you're not too far from a bottle bank. So bottle banks are collected. They're obviously single stream by color, and then they go into a truck that will be segregated by color. That glass then is brought back to a facility in Nace at the moment, all managed by a company called Rehab Glasgow, and they will then color sort it. They'll put some of the mixed glass through a process and it's optically separated by color. And the end goal for those guys again is to have a single stream of clear bottles, brown bottles, and green bottles. And then they get then ferried off to other outlets where they're resold, reused, melted back down, and new glass created out of it, which is fantastic because it ticks all the boxes for our circular economy.
Brilliant, brilliant. And then the compost waste, the food waste. So it's
Yeah.
really worth it. I'm just again talking to our customers. It is worth it to have your brown bin on your counter and to separate your food. It's worth it because it's less expensive. That's true. It doesn't make it heavy. But how does it help the environment in the long run? Where does
Yeah,
this
it's
go?
it's yeah, it's hugely beneficial. So organic waste or compost goes through a process called anaerobic digestion. And that process is effectively putting it into a big, let's say it's like a big pot, okay? And there's microorganisms added to it,
Oh, right.
because there's no carbon dioxide within this chamber.
Yes.
And those microorganisms will break down the organic matter that's in within. So the food, all those other things, it'll break it all down. And during that process, methane gas is extracted off it, essentially a biofuel. Methane gas is extracted off the process, and that methane gas is reused and sold to the grid to reheat homes or other elements. And then you're left with a material which is a digestate, which is a dry, like a compost, really, Deirdre. And that material can be used as a fertilizer or a compost.
Gosh, that's so interesting. It just shows you that when you put your potato peels in, you're turning it into such valuable materials that are reused
Indeed.
that help the environment. The methane gas isn't escaping from some landfill, creating
Hmm.
up the planet, and you're creating a fertilizer, which was so much better, with a natural fertilizer, which is so much better
Yeah.
for the environment.
And the other thing I'd say, Deirdre, most of the organic outlets that are processing via anaerobic digestion, they also have the ability to take out a fair level of contaminants before the organic waste goes through the process. So I suppose if any of your listeners are ever in doubt, should it go into my organic? Should it go into my general waste? Maybe put it in the organic because at least there's a chance of it being recovered. If it goes into general waste, it's gone forever.
Okay, so general waste then, that goes into either incinerators or landfill?
Yeah, so incineration or landfill, largely incineration in this country now. Landfill has been reduced year on year via the introduction of the landfill levy tax, albeit it's not the preference is incineration. Landfill, has had its time, in my opinion.
Really?
Now
In
there's still
Ireland?
landfills. Yeah, there's still landfills in this country, and they're still used, but not to the extent they were in the last 10 to 15 years. It's all incineration now, really, and mainly incineration.
And what about the existing landfill sites that have
Mhm.
closed down? Are they problematic releasing methane? I believe there were some fires in one in Kildare a number of years ago.
Yeah, there can be combustion within the landfill at times, and there's a fair bit of management. You're also concerned about potential leaking into the water. There's a lot of management, but the EPA, who are the Environmental Protection Agency, would put a lot of compliance around managing these landfills now. And any methane gas that is generated from redundant landfills is being reused.
Very good.
You
And so
know,
it's being
it's
turned
being
into
captured.
biofuels. Are they actually being able to harness the methane gas that's being
Correct.
taken from the landfills and use it for biofuels?
Indeed. Yes. Yeah.
Because it's a
So
dangerous hot house gas, isn't it? Methane is
indeed.
more powerful. It heats up the planet so much more than carbon release. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
very
no, for sure. And I think incineration, look at if you think of the differences between incineration and landfill, incineration reduces 70 to 90% of the waste that it takes in. Yes.
despite the toxic releases to the environment, or what about that? People are nervous about incinerators. I'm curious.
There are pollutants. So the main incinerator in Dublin is called Dublin Waste to Energy, and it was a hot topic for a number of years, residents living in the Ringsend area. But
Yes,
it's been managed quite well, and it now serves as an electricity provider to about maybe 80,000 homes. So there's a lot of electricity generated from the incineration process.
okay,
And yes, there is a small portion of pollutants.
yes,
There is, but they are managed. And there would be a lot of regulation around those pollutants. I suppose a lot of measuring the levels of pollutants to ensure that they are minimal.
which is really important if you're living next to an incinerator. That could be really
Yeah.
affect your lifestyle. So the managing of those pollutants is important. However, landfills, why do the government want to finish with landfills? And it doesn't maybe a basic question, but something people might not be aware of.
It's more around just the time frame. So you take a landfill there, right? You've waste there decomposing in a hole in the ground over 30 to 50 years. And even at that, does it ever decompose? Landfills, you need a lot of space. An incinerator, requires much less footprint of a site. The emissions are long term from a landfill, the methane gas. There's a lot of other downsides to landfill. Now, there certainly is a place for landfill. And I think in the US they still do a lot of landfill, but throughout Europe it's now all around incineration.
And that moves me nicely into my next question, because I've been talking specifically about Ireland. And I remember a few years ago, Neville, we were having a chat and I looked it up, and it was actually back in 2017. And I know we were having a chat and you said, "Oh, Deirdre, things are terrible because China has stopped accepting waste." And I had this image then, and I've looked it up since, these huge, ginormous blocks of first world waste being delivered to third world countries. And I know China has moved far from that since. But I just wondered if you could comment on that sort of exporting, the third world exporting its high waste levels. I believe that there's 4 pounds of waste per person per day in Ireland. I looked up that statistic. I don't know if that's
Yeah,
true.
yeah, yeah. I think what is it? There's about most households generate about 1.5 ton a year of waste. I think yeah, you're right. Annually, it's about 650 kgs per person, and the average household's about 2.6, so about 1.5 ton. But back to China. Oh yeah, so China in December 2017 introduced a policy called the sword policy, and what that sword policy was, they had been taking waste in from many European countries throughout the world, but there was a lot of contamination within the waste they were importing.
Yes.
And this in turn caused huge problems for China. And also they were turning containers away. In a nutshell, they deemed that the waste was too dirty to accept. So they introduced this policy and they gave, I think it's about a 5% contamination level. So if, a container came in and there was more than 5% contaminants, it was returned and rejected. And you can only imagine how much that cost in terms of transport across the waters again,
Yes.
and the waste. So, Yeah, look, it made markets think. It made the global markets think about maybe we've an over reliance on China, and maybe we need to look at ourselves and look at how we can manage our own waste. So it was probably a good thing, to be very honest with you,
Yeah, it
that
was difficult at
people.
the time, but it caused a
Yeah,
change of behavior. And isn't it incredible how careless it was that the waste was being shipped over there and was full of contaminants? I always had one of our chefs used to say, you have to, a terrible graphic thing, but you have to wash our recyclables before you put them in a bin because some child on a dump somewhere in the third world is going to be rooting through it. It was kind of
yeah,
shocking thing to say to the staff,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it was. So has there been a change in that, or is India still suffering from taking our waste, or is Africa still suffering from taking our first world waste?
Look, it's largely given that we're all very, very conscious of our carbon footprint now. We've all considered, okay, logistically, how far is it taking me to transport my waste? And also, one is the moral piece, but the other is the financial piece. And, it would suit all waste processors to minimize that travel time. So,
Financial point of view. Yes, very good.
yeah, so most of our waste that we would export is going to Europe now.
Oh,
And
really?
Germany is probably the country that number one in terms of, recycling, segregation, and I suppose their environmental policies. But as it stands, most of the stuff that we would export would go to Europe, simply because we don't have the infrastructure here to process,
And is it to
uh,
incinerators it goes, or to
or
digesters?
recyclers. But in most cases here now, the waste collectors are processing to single stream and then shipping overseas. So to my point earlier about the cardboard bales, those cardboard bales are put in a container and then sent to a paper mill somewhere in potentially Holland, where the product is reused.
Well, Neville, I just to kind of wrap up here, I just want to say it sounds so much more progressed than the last time I had this a very light conversation with you back in 2017. Because as you said, Cornucopia was very conscious, and we sort of even went ahead of the legislation. I think afterwards, legislation came and said that restaurants had to separate. But we were doing it with you right even earlier because obviously we
Indeed.
had a huge environmental interest, etc., etc. Not praising ourselves or anything, but that is just what we did. We were trying to be greener.
Yeah.
So, but at the time, some of my staff used to say, "Oh God, is it worth it? Sure, I've seen the bins, and everything just goes all into the same spot in the bin." So, in other words, the skip that had the recyclables that was thrown into the bin, not necessarily your bin now, but and so people had this doubt that they went to all of this effort, but it's wonderfully reassuring to hear that there are actually streams and processes, and it does actually help with the global warming, removing all the methane that just went, creating biofuels, and really helping. One thing we didn't touch on before we finish is plastics and what happens with plastic. So I did mean to ask you about that because of there's concern about marine life and the sea and all that, and that we even
Yeah.
have plastics in our own digestive system now, microplastics.
Indeed, indeed. And I suppose at Key Green, we separate all of our plastics. It's a real problem. I think, globally and our own government has had a real focus on single-use plastics now because of what we've seen in marine life. And, it's very sad to see the level of pollution in our waters, largely plastic, and then the impact that has on life underwater. Looking at be it turtles entangled in plastic bags or bags around their necks or anything like that. So it's a real worry for the living underwater. And unless it's improved, yeah, we'll have a serious problem on our hands. But I think some of the measures that have been taken with single-use plastics, with this return bottle scheme now also, and businesses and families have had to look at themselves, even with the plastic bag levy. Take businesses now, rarely you'll go in and see a plastic straw. It's all paper straws. So, everyone is trying to make changes. And to your point earlier, if everyone even makes a small change collectively, it makes a huge, huge impact.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. I heard recently that there are some plastic digesters being developed. Some microbes which can now, at the moment, they're a bit slow. So it takes too long, but there is some talk about working with some type of mushrooms or some kind of plastic digesters. Have you ever come across anything like that? Or
Yeah, in 2016 in Japan, there was a discovery made, and I won't try and pronounce the name, but it's Ideon Ella Sakazi. My Japanese isn't that good, Deirdre. Apologies.
oh,
But
yeah,
anyway,
let's work on that now,
um,
Neville.
um, but it's a novel bacteria species that I suppose is extraordinary for its ability to break down popular plastics.
Wow.
And I think it's going to be a game changer. It's going to be a game changer.
Yes.
Given it's a good start, but ultimately we want to be able to break down plastic.
Okay, so we won't go in too much into the technicality of what plastics are made of or anything like that. But basically, the goal of Cornucopia Climate Chats, Neville, is to make people feel empowered. I think people feel that there's nothing I can do. This is all too big, all too scary. Climate change is overwhelming. And we all know that when our nervous systems get overwhelmed, we go into freeze state. And, that is one reaction to stress. So, what I'm really encouraged by you today, I can't tell you how encouraged I am that it is really worthwhile. And if somebody says to me, there's no point in doing that, why should I bother recycling? I'll be able to be more informed. And I hope that the listeners are able to be a bit more informed. So, thank you, Neville, and well done on your work. It's a very important work. As when we say we're going to throw things away, there's no away, it's just someplace else on the planet. So it's really great to see the progress over the last 20 years. So thanks a million, and Cornucopia will continue to use your wonderful service. And I know you don't do domestic waste. Pea Green doesn't do domestic waste, it's just commercial. And one last thing I will say is we haven't talked much about farm waste. So I know that also goes into digesters. Do you deal with farm waste at all, or
No, we've come across it before because I suppose back in the day, traditionally manure was spread on the land, and now it's obviously captured and put through AD2. And
excuse
again,
me, what's AD2? What's
it's
AD2?
sorry, sorry, put through anaerobic digestion.
Oh yeah, anaerobic
Also,
digestion.
I suppose again, it's creating that biofuel, and us as a nation not being too reliant on fossil fuels for electricity. So obviously these biofuels are all naturally created, and I think it gives us all more comfort.
We're more self-reliant and not having to
Correct.
yes, with a
Yeah, yeah,
stable
yeah,
world, it's great to be self-reliant in food, self-reliant in energy. Well, on that
yeah.
note, Neville, we'll finish up because I know you have to get back to your busy schedule. Are you doing anything interesting today in terms of waste?
I have a couple of meetings back in Key Green, Deirdre, and then we're doing a recycling talk, one of our larger corporate customers, whereby we're going into their offices and bringing in some samples of waste to show their staff what can be derived from, let's say, a piece of cardboard. So we're going to bring in some bales of cardboard with us. We're going to bring in other items so they can see, okay, that's what happens. So if I separate that single piece of cardboard, it turns into a bigger bale, and essentially there's value in it. It's a commodity.
Wonderful,
Yeah,
Neville. I'm very impressed because you're out there doing it, but you're also letting people know that it's valid and a good thing to do. Well, thanks very
indeed.
much. Good luck with your work. That's a wonderful thing to be doing, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Deirdre, and thanks for being a great customer.
Okay, thank you.